The desert wind always carried warnings, but on that particular evening it howled like a thing alive, an old spirit running its fingers across the dry grass, whispering to anyone who dared listen. The sun had already dropped behind the crags of the jagged Arizona hills, painting the world in a bruised violet glow that meant night was coming fast and dangerous. Jedediah Crow, a cowboy whose reputation stretched farther than his cattle trails, stood at the edge of his porch with a mug of black coffee cooling in his hands, squinting at the horizon as though the earth itself was trying to deliver him a message. He had known the land long enough to sense when something was out there, moving against the natural rhythm of the desert. And tonight, there was something, a feeling, a tremor, an unsettled shift in the air, as though fate had stepped onto his property and had yet to knock. He had been planning for a quiet night, just him, the fire, and the loyal old mare inside the stables, but that was before he saw the silhouettes forming out of the swirling dust. 3 figures, faint at first, half consumed by the twilight. 1 tall, 2 smaller. They moved toward his cabin with a strange mixture of exhaustion and determination, like shadows fighting to remain upright against the relentless push of the desert wind. Jedediah straightened, setting down the mug and placing his hand near the revolver at his hip, not drawing it, not yet, but ready. Strangers in the desert didn't simply appear. They came with stories, debts, dangers, or ghosts trailing behind them. As the figures drew nearer, the details carved themselves out of the dusk. The tallest, an older woman with a proud spine though her steps faltered, leaned on a walking stick that looked carved from ancient mesquite, weathered and worn but strangely elegant. Her long hair, streaked with silver and black, was braided with tiny turquoise beads that clinked softly with each step. Her face was unreadable, a mask of endurance shaped by years of hardship, the kind of face that didn't ask for sympathy. The 2 smaller figures were girls, daughters, most likely, wrapped in thin blankets that had clearly done little to shield them from the unforgiving wind. Their eyes were wide, alert, watchful in a way that told Jed they had seen far too much for their age. Apache, all 3 of them, unmistakably. And that alone was enough to set uncertainty prickling across his skin. Relations between settlers and Apache bands had been tense for years, even a peaceful encounter carried the risk of history rising up like a rattlesnake. But these 3, they didn't walk like people searching for conflict. They walked like people searching for the last place on earth where hope might still exist. The older woman stopped a few feet from the porch, lifting her chin with a quiet dignity that made even the restless wind pause around her. "You are Jedediah Crow," she said, not as a question, but as a statement carved from the bones of a prophecy she already knew the answer to. Her voice was rough, yet strong, woven with the cadence of prayers spoken to the moon. Jed felt something shift inside him, a subtle click of destiny slotting into place. "I am," he replied carefully. "And who might you be, ma'am?" The woman glanced at her daughters once before meeting his eyes. Eyes like storm clouds, ancient, knowing, tired. "I am Atsabah," she said. "And these are my daughters, Tiva and Sani." The girls bowed their heads respectfully. "We ask for shelter," Atsabah continued, though her tone made it clear she wasn't asking out of weakness. "Just until morning light." Jed exhaled slowly. Shelter. A simple word, but not a simple request. Not out here. Not in this era where every Apache traveler might be chased by soldiers, scouts, or outlaws pretending to be either. Offering shelter could mean getting himself tangled in someone else's war. But refusing shelter, looking into those tired faces and saying no, felt like a sin even hell might refuse. He studied them a moment longer. Their clothes were worn, torn in places, dust-caked and sun-beaten. The girl's cheeks were hollow. Atsabah's hands trembled slightly as she clutched her walking stick. These were not threats. These were survivors. "What's chasing you?" Jed asked quietly. Atsabah's expression tightened. Not with fear, but with the weight of a secret she wasn't ready to give away. "Not the kind of trouble you know how to shoot," she said simply. "Only the kind that follows, no matter how far you walk." A chill crawled up Jed's spine despite the desert heat clinging to the evening air. He didn't like riddles, but something about her voice told him this was not the moment to press. He stepped back from the doorway, nodding toward the interior. "You can come inside, for tonight." Atsabah studied him for a long beat, perhaps making sure he meant his words. Then she gave a small nod of gratitude, humble, yet regal, and stepped onto the porch. The girls followed closely, sticking to their mother's silhouette as though it shielded them from every unseen danger lurking behind them. Jed opened the door, and the warm light from the cabin spilled out, bathing their weary forms in a gold glow. For the first time that night, the wind outside seemed to relax. But Jed couldn't shake the strange feeling twisting in his gut. Something was coming, something that would change everything. And by letting these three inside, he had just invited that something through his own door. Nightfall settled over the desert like a heavy blanket woven from shadow and silence, and inside Jedediah Crow's cabin the three Apache travelers sat close to the fire as though they were afraid of what might happen if its warmth faded. The flames crackled gently, throwing flickers of amber light across the wooden walls, illuminating the faces of Atsaba and her daughters, faces carved by exhaustion and long miles, but also by something deeper, something ancient. Jed sat across from them, one knee propped up, elbow resting on it, trying to make sense of the uneasy weight pressing against his chest. He'd offered food, water, the fire, basic kindness, but the tension in the room was thick enough to layer over furniture. The girls whispered in Apache to their mother, soft and rhythmic, the kind of whispering that carried fear just beneath the surface. Atsaba answered them in low tones that soothed but did not reassure. Jed couldn't understand the words, but he understood the emotion, worry tightly wrapped around duty. He had seen it in soldiers, settlers, outlaws, and wanderers alike. Survivors spoke the same language, no matter the tribe. After several minutes, Atsaba lifted her eyes toward him. "You wonder what follows us," she said, not accusing, not fearful, simply stating the truth between them. Jed didn't pretend otherwise. "I do," he said. "Especially if it's coming my way." Atsaba nodded, accepting his honesty. "It is not a man," she said quietly. "Not a soldier. Not an outlaw. What follows us is older than your people's arrival on this land. Older than the oldest bones buried beneath these deserts." Jed frowned. He wasn't a superstitious man, though he respected the stories older cultures kept alive. But the way she spoke, with a calm certainty, with reverence, made him shiver. "You mean a spirit?" he asked. "A curse." Atsaba took a slow breath, the fire casting her features into a haunting mosaic of shadow and light. "The land remembers harm," she said. "The wind carries warnings, and the earth knows when a soul has broken the pact between life and death." Her daughters huddled closer to her. Jed's pulse quickened. He wasn't afraid, not yet, but something about the atmosphere made him behave like a man leaning over the edge of a cliff. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "I'm going to need more than poetry if danger's nearby." She studied him for a long, quiet moment, searching, perhaps, for the kind of man he was. Then she spoke. "3 nights ago, men came to our village," she said. "Not soldiers, not scouts, a band of white hunters." Jed stiffened. He already disliked where this was going. "They wanted something our people guard carefully," Atsaba continued. "A carving of no great size, no great beauty, just stone to a man who does not understand. But to us, it holds the memory of one who walked between worlds. A guardian spirit, its resting place is sacred." Jed leaned forward. "And they took it," Atsaba nodded. "They took it, and when our warriors tried to stop them, they were shot. My husband among them." Jed inhaled sharply. Another widow of another senseless killing. He'd seen too many. But there was more, something worse. He could feel it building in her voice. "When they disturbed the stone," she continued, "they woke something that should never walk under the moon." Jed's hands tightened around the edge of his chair. "A creature, a spirit," she said. "A vengeful one, formerly bound, now loose, and bound to the bloodline nearest to the stone." Her hand tightened around her daughter's shoulders. "Us." The fire crackled sharply, as though startled by her words. Jed exhaled. He didn't dismiss her claim. He'd learned long ago that the most dangerous things in this land didn't always carry a name written in English. But he also knew fear had a way of twisting reality. "If something's chasing you," he said gently, "I can help protect you. But I need to know what it looks like." Atsaba met his gaze with eyes that suddenly looked much older. "It has no single face," she murmured. "Sometimes it walks like a man. Sometimes like an animal. Sometimes like shadow." Her daughters clung to her sleeves. "But it always smells of death. And it moves without sound, even on dry leaves." Right then, right as the words left her lips, something scratched lightly against the wooden wall of the cabin. Once, twice, slow, deliberate. Tiva gasped sharply, covering her mouth. Sanny's shoulders trembled. Jed stood instantly, hand hovering near his revolver. The sound was too deliberate to ignore, too soft to dismiss. Coyotes didn't scratch like that. Neither did wolves. The scratching came again, this time at the window. Jed stepped toward it, but Atsuba hissed sharply, "Do not open it." Then the wind outside shifted, no longer natural, no longer free. It pressed against the cabin like a presence with intent. The fire dimmed as though something sucked the warmth straight from the air. Atsuba whispered a chant in Apache, ancient, rhythmic, trembling around the edges. Jed could feel the desert listening. Whatever followed them, it had found them, and it was standing just outside his door.